Hello everyone, my name is Jen and I'm the lab manager for the Skagit Valley College Department of Environmental Conservation. I help students learn lab and field research methods, and I also help out with the many field trips that our students take. I'm always on the lookout for new sites to show our students, or just to visit in my spare time. Recently, I learned about a very large but rarely visited natural area literally right next to Mount Vernon, and today I would like to take you on a trip to explore it. Let's go to Barney Lake Conservation Area. Barney Lake Conservation Area is owned by Skagit Land Trust. Skagit Land Trust conserves wildlife habitat, agricultural and forest lands, scenic open space, wetlands, and shorelines for the benefit of our community and as a legacy for future generations. Founded in 1992, the Trust protects over 8,000 acres of land, including more than 40 miles of shoreline. Luckily for me, I was able to contact volunteer land stewards for more information about Skagit Land Trust and Barney Lake. Land steward Brenda Cunningham gave me some background about what the position means and how she has become involved with conservation biology in our community.
I ended up being very interested in what I would call conservation biology, that is, trying to decide where are the best places to protect in order to conserve wildlife corridors or places for wildlife to coexist with humans and still be able to get through their migratory paths. Also interested in the field of resilience and how to protect the right places, anticipating changes due to climate change. So some of that is related to what we call resilience in terms of protecting the most diverse places now is likely going to help us protect diversity of species in the future too. And I started as a volunteer steward with my husband on Barney Lake in 1998.
The 361 acres in Barney Lake Conservation Area is preserved for wildlife and includes several distinct habitat areas. As I have explored and learned more about this site, I keep asking myself why I didn't know more about it and why I hadn't visited it earlier. It really is right next to Mount Vernon city limits, with the southern Trumpeter Creek section located immediately north of College Way and west of the Big Rock roundabout. To get to the lake itself, the best access is from the north through Signey Road.
This was a field. This was called the Cammock property, C-A-M-M-O-C-K. So sometimes we'll say, oh, I'm going over to the Cammock property, and we're talking about this. So this was an open field down here. And now you'll see that there are trees that are, 20 to 30 feet tall.
Wow.
Some of which I personally planted.
Hey, that's cool.
So there have been a variety of planting projects here. Some of them little quick one-offs, like, oh, we need something to do with the class today, and let's plant some trees, and a lot of those, didn't do very well. But then there were other plantings that did really well, as you can see.
Yeah.
I said 20 to 30 feet. That's more like a 40-foot tree, isn't it?
So you were involved in planting some of these trees?
Some of them, yeah.
That's pretty
I don't know
cool.
which specific ones.
You didn't whittle your name in the trunk while you were...
And there were other projects to remove barbed wire fencing. So sometime 6 or more months ago, a couple of members of the Land Trust staff flagged a path through here. So it's that flagging that I'm following.
So Barney Lake is open to the public to visit, right?
Yeah. It's just a matter of not really having well-defined trails at this point.
Yeah, thank you. You found the way. This is the gate. This is the doorway.
Wildlife
I just cleaned out around this last month, so you can...
Yeah. So when it says no trespassing,
Oh,
does that
that's
mean...
just to give deniability. If there was someone that you didn't want on here, you could say, but it's open to the public.
Okay.
I suppose it hasn't happened to me, but I could imagine that people that live up on the cul-de-sac might say, well, who are you, what are you doing? And that's why I always put a note on my dashboard that in this case says Skagit Land Trust Work Party, and has my cell phone number.
If you do choose to visit this site, remember that it is the sort of undeveloped place that you would use entirely at your own risk. Accessing Barney Lake is no easy task and requires 10 to 15 minutes of travel through thick brush and muddy ground. It is also considered polite to leave a note on your dashboard with your cell phone number explaining to the neighbors what you're doing. Restoring and maintaining conservation areas is a lot of work. Skagit Land Trust is a non-profit organization that relies heavily on community volunteers, including land stewards, in order to achieve their goals.
Back in 1998, there was maybe one or two employees at the Land Trust, a very small organization at the time, and they were looking for people to help keep an eye on the properties. And they had this suite of maybe 9 or 10 properties that they owned outright. You know, the conservation easement, the Land Trust does work and has many tools to use, one of them being conservation easements, where the land is still owned by a specific landowner, but they've agreed to not develop it in certain ways. And then the Land Trust also ends up owning properties outright and really has to take care of them. The Land Trust becomes the landowner and has to do all the management on the property and keep an eye out on them. And staff realized over time that as the number of those properties grew, they were going to need help from more than just their board members and a few casual volunteers, but rather get people lined up to adopt the property and it becomes stewards for that specific property. So in 98, I attended a meeting. They advertised a meeting in a newsletter saying we're looking for volunteers to come in and learn about what this job might entail and agree to be stewards on properties, you know, all over the county, scattered all over the county. And a group of us met, and it was really interesting. There was just the right number of people at the meeting, and everybody was able to choose the property that they wanted to steward, and most people took something that was the closest to their home. And I live in Mount Vernon, so Barney Lake, I think I was the last person to choose, and I couldn't believe Barney Lake was still available. I was like, well, yeah, that's the one I want. And then I went home and told Tim about this meeting, and he was like, well, that sounds like fun. Let's do that. We enjoy doing things in the community, and we're both interested in natural history and wildlife and plants. So it seemed like a natural fit to help out. We're both involved with public lands and places where people can hike and bird watch and just enjoy the outdoors. And so we really wanted to contribute to preserving lands within our communities. You know, we had both worked for the National Park Service, and Tim was still working for the Park Service at that time. So we kind of knew about the big public lands that are up in the mountains and the big national park lands and national forest lands, and thought it was important that there be smaller places within communities or in people's neighborhoods that are also protected. So this was a good fit.
It's nice that you have a co-steward in your household.
Oh yeah.
So there's 3 stewards on this property. Are you all doing the same job, or do you split it up into different tasks?
You know, originally we set it up to, Janet's been a co-steward for maybe 5 years. Originally we kind of set it up, split it out like that, or geographically I mean. But then over time that sort of went away, and now it's, you know, she'll come out when she can and we'll come out when we can, and we notice things that need to be done and communicate with each other about that. And then in conjunction with the Land Trust staff, we'll have a work party. They'll recruit other people to help, and it's turned out to work really, really well. And everybody's got different expertise, you know, of the 3 of us. And most of the properties don't have 3 stewards, but this one is so big and we weren't keeping up with it. So when Janet appeared on the scene, and was interested, we said great.
Yeah.
Once you get to the lake, you will be struck by the fact that you are definitely at a lake, but you may not be sure exactly where the boundaries of the lake lie. It begs the question, is this a lake, or just a large and very soggy wetland? When the nearby Skagit River floods during the winter time, it backs up into the Nookachamps Creek, which causes Barney Lake to flood. In fact, the entire Barney Lake conservation area is a sink for floodwaters. It's currently June, and you can still see reeds from winter floods hanging in trees 4 to 6 feet above the ground. The ground itself is covered in thick rafts of dead and dried reeds. Some young plants push their way up under the reeds, while others root directly on top of them. In the past, this was a popular duck hunting site. It became one of the first properties acquired by Skagit Land Trust when land was gifted to and purchased by the trust in 1995. One landowner, Dr. Perry, was an avid duck hunter and wished to see the land protected for wildlife habitat. That original lake property lies at the northern portion of the current conservation area. While no longer open for hunting, this preserve certainly affords ample wildlife watching opportunities.
Now, if it were the middle of the winter and we came out, if the water level allowed us to, and stood on this, hundreds of ducks would rise up. So I try not to disturb them. I don't come out this far. It doesn't look that impressive from here, but if we were up close to that beaver lodge, that is a really big beaver lodge.
It looks big.
It's as tall as you are.
It looks as big as this rock we're standing on.
Yeah. And then can you see way in the distance there's another one that's maybe a little bit smaller.
Oh yeah, I see that.
So that's where they live. And there's also one, I don't know if it's active or not, right there.
Like just
That mound
like
there,
50
and the
feet
grass
from
is
us?
kind of hiding it. Yeah.
Yeah.
There were some freshly cut sticks on top of it the other week. So I think they're at least using it as a platform.
It's just so amazing how big those lodges are, and they have moats around them. So they're just so cleverly built, and they could be considered our enemy because they're cutting some of the trees down that we plant. But at Barney Lake, it's not such a big deal. They're at least at the side on the west shore where those big lodges are. They're working on willows and things that are abundant along the edge there. If you have a chance someday, maybe doing an amphibian survey or something, you can get pretty close to those beaver lodges if you have chest waders on.
Right.
They're so enormous and really well, solidly built. You can, you could have 10 people standing on top of them and they wouldn't collapse. They're just really well built and with a lot of materials. But it is fun that they're there. And I've actually, I don't know that I've ever seen one. I think maybe I have, but they're pretty secretive, of course, when they hear us stomping around.
Barney Lake is also prime habitat for amphibians. Every spring, Land Steward Janet Cray trains volunteer surveyors and runs amphibian surveys here and on other Skagit Land Trust conservation areas.
Do you do amphibian surveys out here?
Yes. We don't manage it every year, but on the Barney Lake property there are 4 separate areas of the property where we've done amphibian surveys. We don't manage to hit all of them every year.
Yeah.
One of them is to come in as you and I just did and go along here and then, with great difficulty, exit onto Martin Road. It was horrible. We did it. It was like, how could it be this hard? And the water's much deeper and we're in waders,
Wow. What kind of amphibians do you find out here?
By far, the most common or abundant would be red-legged frogs and northwestern salamanders. And you know, you see chorus tree frogs, and people that have sharper eyes than I do for these things will sometimes find their egg masses. They're little. As you probably know, they're quite little.
So I actually assumed that you would be doing the amphibian surveys by looking for egg masses.
That's what we're doing, yeah.
Okay.
But
yeah.
the egg masses
Oh, I
for
see.
tree frogs are wee.
Oh, really?
And for red-legged frogs and for the long-toed salamander, they're you know, bigger than a baseball, smaller than a softball.
Have you found bullfrog out here yet?
Yes. Bullfrog is here. I've not seen their egg masses. Those come out later than we do our surveys.
Oh.
We've come on live bullfrogs a few times, and when Janet is with us, she knows how to take care of that. She's very matter of fact about it.
Yeah.
I've seen them a few times, heard them a few times. This is totally anecdotal, but my impression is there aren't a lot of them, but they are here.
So they're not taking over yet?
Well, in the sense that there are other amphibians, yeah. They haven't wiped out everything. Janet is always struck by the relatively few number of amphibians that we find.
Yeah.
You know, off the top of my head, I don't know I couldn't tell you the number of egg masses, but that data exists if you
Yeah.
wanted to see it. Barney Lake has a lot of interesting animals, a lot of interesting birds.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm particularly attentive to those, but the mammals are so much harder to see. I'm just a wannabe community scientist.
Yeah.
And I've picked up knowledge of natural history along the way in the various jobs I've had and volunteer work. And with birds. You know, I've been interested in birds since I was 7 years old, when my second grade teacher provided some materials and props in the classroom that got me interested in birds. And
That's pretty cool.
I don't know if any of my classmates were doing that.
So, okay, on the topic of birds, the creek is named Trumpeter Creek. I'm assuming after the trumpeter swan.
That's what I assume.
So I saw a number that said we get 10,000 swans in Skagit County every winter, or more than 10,000, and that's 2/3 of the swans in northwestern Washington are out here. Do you get any at Barney Lake?
Oh yeah, yeah. Barney Lake is a famous place for swans in that, you know, trumpeter swans were gone from the northwestern United States for some decades because they were hunted and kind of hunted out. And was it in the 50s one day, I don't know what date exactly, someone noticed a few trumpeter swans at Barney Lake. That was their first reappearance in the northwestern United States, outside of Alaska.
Really? Was here at Barney Lake?
Right here, like right there.
Wow.
And you know, as time went by, their population increased because they were no longer hunted. And every year, WDFW does a count of swans in Skagit and other counties. And I don't know the count for the last year, but over recent years, I mean, it was typical for the wintering population of trumpeters in Skagit County to be like around 7,000.
Yeah.
And then there would be an additional 2,000 to 3,000 tundra swans. Now, on a continental basis, there are many more tundra swans than there are trumpeters, over 100,000. But it just happens that where we live, there are far more trumpeter swans, and this is a very wonderful thing, and it's a very unusual, special thing about Skagit County. So, you know, why so many? Because we have what they need.
Yeah.
We have places like this where they can feed and safely roost for the night.
Yeah.
And we have saltwater bays where they can also feed, and other wetlands, freshwater and saltwater both, where they can feed, and the agricultural fields. So Martha Jordan, who is the big swan expert in the Northwest, she says, if it weren't for dairy, we wouldn't have trumpeter swans. She's overstating it a little bit, but I said, what do you mean by that, Martha? And what she means is that the reason, she says, and you being in farming, correct me if I'm wrong, but she says the reason that most corn is grown here
Oh yeah,
is to feed dairy cattle.
that's corn grown as fodder is the #1 way that corn is produced in the nation.
And when trumpeter swans, they nest in like southeast Alaska, western Canada on ponds
Huh.
in the forest. And when they come back here to winter, when they come down here, the first thing they go to, she says, is those harvested cornfields, because there's still a lot of, kernels and stuff on the ground, and they feed on that. And then once we've had a good hard freeze and the potatoes left in the ground have
Yes.
softened, they
Yes.
like those. You've seen it.
Yeah, I
Along
have.
Chuckanut
We
Drive and
take a
places.
field trip of students to go look at them
Oh yeah.
on the snow geese.
So that's why so many trumpeter swans here. We just have the right set of situations. On the power lines way over there, you see those orange balls,
Yes.
which are big like this. I always, when we first moved here, I thought, oh, those are so helicopters don't hit the lines. I don't know why, but that, no. Trumpeter swans coming back here early on, one of the two principal causes of accidental deaths to trumpeter swans is collision with power lines.
Really?
So those devices were put on those power lines years ago to help trumpeter swans see them. Sometimes it's after dark when the trumpeter swans come in here to spend the night,
Yeah.
and they could hit those lines.
What's the other leading cause of death?
Poisoning from lead shot.
Yes.
Lead shot, of course, is banned now for waterfowl hunting, but there's a lot of lead pellets, probably a lot here, in the sediments. And trumpeter swans, if you've seen them feed in a wetland, they tip up, the long neck allows them to reach quite deep, and they muck around in the sediments and pull out certain rhizomes and things to eat. And in doing so, they can end up ingesting lead pellets. 3 lead pellets. Trumpeter swans are one of the largest, one of the heaviest birds in the world that's capable of flight. They can be 30 plus pounds. They're a really big bird.
Oh wow.
But 3 pellets is enough to kill one of them.
Holy cow.
And it doesn't kill them right off. They get lead poisoning, and you'll see swans that are very lethargic and their head is down and they're not with other swans, and they're dying from lead poisoning.
Wow.
So Martha Jordan could reel off statistics for you on how many die each year. This is not particularly a place that she expresses concern about from that point of view. There are some other places in, particularly a lake way up north in Whatcom County, where it's been a big problem, and they put devices on this lake to try to keep swans off of it because there's so much
Wow.
lead. Duck hunting happened here for a long time, so to go in now and try to sift out that
Yeah.
lead, you would probably bring more to it up to a place where it was reachable by
Yeah.
swans, and it's better just to leave it. And as sediments accumulate over the years, maybe it gets deeper. And
Yeah, hopefully sinks. So what does
oh, that's a
is that?
cinnamon teal. That is a beautiful bird.
That
Look
is
at that.
gorgeous.
I wish I could hand you my binoculars fast enough for you to see it.
What do swans eat when they're feeding out here?
I assume that they're getting, seeds and roots and rhizomes
Okay.
of wetland plants. I don't know more specifically than that.
Okay.
Cinnamon teal. Not a rare bird, but I probably have not seen one here before.
Gorgeous.
Who knows, with this kind of vegetation, who knows what else is out here? It doesn't do
Yeah.
justice to it, but cinnamon teal.
Well, and she had different colors on the tops and bottom of her wing, and just
Yeah,
That's
they're
gorgeous.
closely related to blue-winged
Mhm.
teal and have blue in the wing. In fact, the females of those two species are really hard to tell apart. I think those are young mallards. Oh, listen, you hear that? That's Virginia rail.
really.
And they're here year-round.
Are they
But
native?
Oh, yeah. Very hard to see.
Huh.
They look like a little chicken.
For real?
Yeah, they can fly, but usually they just be walking around down in there, and if you're looking at the right place at the right time, you might see one. A couple of mallard drakes going. Oh, look at the babies.
Oh,
The mama disappeared pretty quickly, but I think it was a wood duck.
oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, they nest. There are a few boxes along here that haven't been maintained in years, but they nest in hollows and trees.
I didn't know a wood duck would nest in a box.
Yeah. Oh yeah, people put them
Really?
out. Oh yeah. On a lot
That's
of land
way
trust
cool.
properties, volunteers have put up boxes for them.
That's awesome.
They and hooded mergansers will readily use boxes.
The bulk of recent restoration work has been done at Trumpeter Creek, at the south end of the property, near College Way. If you wish to access this area, you can use the pullout on the north side of College Way. Be sure not to block the gate, since many conservation workers regularly need to go through.
I've read that in 2017, Trumpeter Creek was re-meandered to its through its historical floodplain, and it had been kind of a ditch running straight into the Nookachamps. Do you know if they dug a channel while the old one was still flowing and then switched it over?
It was kind of a fun event. I mean, I was not an integral part of it at all. I was just kind of, as a steward, call on me if you need an extra hand to come and help. But the county really took the lead on re-meandering. So they dug a new channel that has a lot of squiggles in it, and it was dry. You know, they because it wasn't connected to the ditch that had the water in it. So they dug the new channel, and then they, I think, blocked off a part of the old channel, and we actually did several days where students from the college and maybe from Emerson, I don't know who all was volunteering, but there were a lot of people over the course of several days doing fish seining, where you actually drag a net, keeping it down low to the bottom, and try to catch absolutely as many fish as possible, and transferred them into the new channel. So we dewatered the old channel they dewatered it, I should say, in segments, and as a segment was going to be dewatered, they wanted to capture all the fish and move them to the new channel. And in doing that, they were also identifying the diversity of the fish, and it's pretty interesting how many different creatures were of different sizes and such were in the water. And I should know my fish, but I don't, so I couldn't tell you. But some people at the county knew and were keeping track of all that. It was pretty neat.
How did the county decide where to put the new channel?
I don't think there are any historic photographs, but I think there was evidence of little dips here and there. They re-meandered it, but it's more like, let's create as long and slow of a channel as we can, not knowing exactly where it was because of land use in the area for so many years. So it had definitely been straightened. You could, it was straight as an arrow, and the channels in the area tend to naturally be more meandering than that.
While I was out there, I noticed some places in that restoration site around Trumpeter Creek where it was kind of like the stuff that they use to avoid siltation in creeks. It's like a net tube that was stuffed with hay. So it was like a really long sausage of hay, and they laid them out in circles, usually on the inside of a bend of the creek. And then it seemed like that was filled with soil with plantings in it. Was that done to create like a drier place for other plants to live? What was the purpose of that?
I can't say for sure, but for your description makes me think that it was put at diversity, like a place where there could be plants that won't survive being flooded for days on end, because come wintertime, Barney Lake will back up into Trumpeter Creek, and there have been times when it's been very close to College Way, so that whole basin fills in with water, and it may fill in for 3 or 4 days, and some plants just won't survive that, like Douglas fir and some species of conifers. They can tolerate a little bit of moisture because they're native to the Northwest, but not being inundated for days. So it could be that they were trying to build up a place where maybe some different species of trees could be planted that otherwise wouldn't make it if they were planted right next to the creek bed.
So does it flood basically every year in that basin?
Not to that extent, but just about. Probably every 5 years or so, it'll get really full. But every year, water definitely does back up into Trumpeter Creek, at least for a few days. One of the benefits of Barney Lake is that it does accept a lot of flood water and slows that flooding down then, because it kind of captures a lot of water before it gets to the Skagit River. So the Nookachamps flows into it, it fills up, and then overtops eventually into the Skagit. But it buys a little bit more time for flooding impacts downstream.
Immediately east of Trumpeter Creek is an area of sustainable ag land owned by Skagit Land Trust. This spring, they've planted corn. The biggest neighbor in the area is a wetland bank. When wetlands are unavoidably destroyed in construction projects, developers are required to mitigate the impact of the project so that there is no net loss of wetland. One way in which they may do so is to purchase mitigation credits from a wetland mitigation bank. This bank sells credits to developers such as the Washington Department of Transportation, converting according amounts of agricultural land to wetland in order to mitigate for activities like building and expanding roads. Another owner of nearby property is the Skagit County government. When the Skagit Land Trust purchased this area, they worked with Skagit County to acquire parcels that were on the site of a historic railroad. After acquisition, the parcels were deeded to Skagit County for eventual development as part of the Centennial Trail. The Centennial Trail currently stretches from the Skagit County line through all of Snohomish County. There are eventual plans to connect the south end to the Burke-Gilman Trail in Seattle. Currently, Skagit County has only one half-mile section of trail open for public use. It's located off Highway 9 near the southern end of Lake McMurray. One of the most beautiful and rugged areas of the Barney Lake Conservation Area is known as the Bell Property. Unfortunately, it is a little more difficult and dangerous to access than other places within the conservation area. The best place to park is at the Big Rock Roadhouse near the College Way and Highway 9 roundabout. Be aware that parking at this location is for customers only, and violators may be towed. Walk due west to carefully cross Highway 9, then drop down the trail into the woods. If you decide to visit, you should be aware that this area has occasionally been used by people who are experiencing homelessness. It may also be a good idea to watch out for broken glass and other hazards thrown off the major roads by motorists. Follow the narrow, winding trail through the forest and down the steep ravine, and you will find yourself on the west fork of Nookachamps Creek. Look to your right and you will see a beautiful forested ravine with swift, clear water flowing over mossy boulders. Farther downstream, the creek turns west and levels out onto the plain. Forest communities give way to reed canary grass, salmonberry, and beavers. Watch your step, as this stream is habitat for native crayfish, bull trout, and juvenile salmon.
Another couple plant species that surprised me that are so abundant there are serviceberry and the native hazelnut. If you went from Bell, the old house site, down to the shore of the Nookachamps and crossed the Nookachamps and then went up the hill on the other side, there's just a lot of hazelnut and serviceberry up in there. And serviceberry in particular, I'm not used to seeing a lot of in the kind of scrubby wild places here in Skagit County. And I mean, it's native and I know it's there, but it seems like there was a lot up there.
As with many restoration areas, the Barney Lake Conservation Area has challenges in its future.
Invasive species comes to mind right away with the plants, that we're always battling another invasive species, even after you get everything planted with native trees and shrubs in between their non-natives, and then even in a mature forest, you've got non-native plants coming in. It's kind of a constant introduction of non-native plants because of being so close to an urban center and just the proximity of seed sources from people's yards or from whatever adjacent land uses there are. You end up with a lot of non-native plants. So every year there are more non-native plants that we hadn't expected that are now kind of a problem at the site. Some of them, you have to stand back and evaluate, is this, okay, yeah, it's non-native, but is it a problem? And then if it is, how can we take care of it? Because, of course, not all non-native plants are worth trying to eradicate. Some of them are just a nuisance, but they're not really harming the environment. We were just digging up recently Italian arum, which I would say in general, shade-tolerant plants that have that thrive in the shade are the scariest ones, because usually when you try to eradicate a non-native plant like English ivy or this Italian arum, it's ARUM, you think, then once we've disturbed all the soil, getting rid of this bad plant, we'll plant western red cedar and shade it out. But if it's already a shade-tolerant plant, it's kind of a problem. So three or four species that come to mind are English ivy, Italian arum, yellow archangel is out there. I used to think that yellow flag iris was really bad, but it doesn't seem to be spreading too much. It's in the wetlands. It's non-native, but birds do nest in it, and it used to bother me a lot. But now I realize it's probably not that bad. And there's always just trying to get the native plants ahead of those exotics. Like blackberry is not really a big deal. It's everywhere, and it's just so long as it doesn't overwhelm or top the trees you've planted. So we go out when we've first done a planting. We might go out for 3 or 4 years, several times in the year, and cut the blackberries off of the new plants because the blackberries will grow so fast.
Yeah.
But then after like 4 years, then the plants are tall enough that the trees that we've put in are tall enough that we don't have to do that, and we just let the blackberries kind of have the understory for a while, but eventually they get shaded out too. So that's pretty cool to see. Like you probably saw on your way down to the tree or the lakeshore at Signey Place, that there are places where there's nothing between the trees because they're shading. Some of it we do because in the long term, so a lot of native forest has been lost in these low elevation sites, and we want to restore as much of that as we can, but also it's in the long run less expensive to maintain these native forests than to hire somebody to keep mowing a field. So if you have a field that's so small it's not attractive to a farmer for hay, or it's got a lot of weeds in it so it's not attractive either, or it's hard to get to, which a lot of these require the farmer would have to go out onto the highway with the tractor and bring it in, and that's expensive. So we end up having to pay somebody to mow some fields. The flip side is if every place is a forest, there are some species that do better in open fields. So we've been trying to keep some places open for swans next to Barney Lake. That Signey Place is not the open field was not right next to the lake, so it didn't make sense to keep that open for swans. So we planted that.
Simply managing a conservation area wisely can be a challenge on its own.
Preservation of habitat for wildlife is certainly a major reason, and there are multiple reasons for protecting land. That's a major one. But by protecting this, the Land Trust also contributes to having a healthy watershed. And there are other benefits of protecting property and keeping it in an undeveloped state that the Land Trust is certainly interested in supporting.
Yeah.
So, I suppose you could put it that by protecting habitat for wildlife, you're also providing for things that people need, like clean water and carbon sequestration.
Thank you for coming with me to explore the Barney Lake Conservation Area. I hope you're just as excited as I am to see how this area changes over the coming years. See you later, everyone. Have a great day.